Nighttime again because, well, the last month and a bit has been absolute hell and I'm just tired. But I am going to keep doing this. And I'm sitting at a funny angle because I don't know if it's visible that I'm at a funny angle, but I'm sitting up. Usually I'm leaning back, but I'm sitting up now because I'm taking a soothing foot bath, or it's supposed to be soothing anyway. Not sure it's working as intended, but what the hell. Um, and today, this one is a weird one because I've been delving into not exactly niche, but not the absolute most mainstream topics, or at least not the most mainstream genres. I guess genre in itself is a mainstream topic, but not the most mainstream genres. Hello, Spike. Hello. Uh, mm, but this one is definitely mainstream, and it has become mainstream pretty quick, actually. Cyberpunk. And what the hell is there to say about Cyberpunk that someone better than I hasn't said already? Not a lot, I can tell you. But first of all, a primer on it. For those who don't know, Cyberpunk is science fiction, and it's in the near future, slightly near future, within the next 100 years, usually. Not by necessity, but usually it's kind of it's close enough that you can see the trends of our current era. And one of those trends most visible is that everything is more or less corporate. Large corporations have taken over running most things, and governments are kind of just their lackeys, which sounds an awful lot like reality today, of course. But when it was invented back in the 80s, it was less obvious, although the prediction was not as far fetched as some others have been. But yeah, everything is kind of corporate and everything is cold. Not physically cold, although that might be, but society has gone very cynical. It's very selfish and very brutal quite often. And things are rarely black and white. There are very few, if any, real heroes left, and even the villains are more complicated than just evil for the sake of evil. A lot of villains are systematic, just a sign of how things are, a way of the world, while others are just like everybody else, except they have a lot more power. Everybody wants something, everybody's ready to stab their own grandmother in the back to get it. Some just have bigger and fancier knives to do it. And what makes it sci fi is usually that technology is extremely advanced. Some call it high tech, low life, because technology can do wonders, but life is usually not that much better for it. Actually, it's usually pretty much worse, and the really good stuff goes to the wealthy. Um, and the usual cyberpunk is inspired by the old detective noir stories where something bad has happened and someone who is not actually a hero, definitely not an angel, but is still the main protagonist, has to sort it out. And it's often just a web of gray areas. There is a lot of social commentary involved, of course, but there are also some borderline existential questions like where does human end and where does technology begin? Especially when you're dealing with technology that becomes an actual part of your body, artificial organs, artificial limbs, some meant to replace broken ones, some meant to replace weak ones. I don't mean weakened by sickness or infirmity. I mean that the replacements are so high tech that they are better than the natural stuff. You've got artificial intelligence, synthetic organisms, organisms including synthetic humans sometimes, and a lot of questions about whether they are sentient or should be respected as living beings or just property. And sometimes even regular humans are considered property, that kind of stuff. But one thing I've noticed that a lot of the other descriptions of cyberpunk do not get into much is the concept of isolation. And that might be weird to talk about because most cyberpunk takes place in overcrowded cities. Cyberpunk more or less birthed the notion of the sprawl. Cities that are so big and so densely populated that it's just a mass of humans spreading for miles in every direction, living shoulder to shoulder, just getting by as best as they can in a world that's usually crumbling around them, both in infrastructure with crumbling cities, crumbling roads, crumbling technologies, because the good stuff is usually snatched up by the rich people who sometimes live in completely different isolated places, and crumbling environments because corporate mega powers means the environment doesn't really stand much of a chance. So in this kind of human writhing mass, the idea of isolation might be weird, but anyone who has lived for extended periods in a large city, a big city, will know that isolation is still there. You are with other people, but you are not with other people. You walk among other people, but you don't interact much with anyone a lot of the time. So it's more a social isolation rather than physical isolation. And in Cyberpunk, a lot of the stuff that triggers events, or just a lot of stuff that even describes characters and places, deals with the notion that people are isolated socially, even if not physically, that people do not interact unless they have a purpose. It's very utilitarian in that nothing is done without being a means to an end. You don't have friends, you have contacts. You don't have family, you have network. You don't have support, you have patrons. You are a cog in the machine and you are expected to be of benefit to others, and you likely will expect others to be of benefit to you as well. And that, in many ways, is an extension of the whole what is human, what is product, or what is human, what is property, perhaps, issue. Because, in many ways, if you're working for someone, you become their full or partial property, and your function is to benefit them. And that gets expressed in a lot of different ways. One of the very fundamental ones is that nearly anyone and everything is expendable. Life is not sacred the way it is in many other genres, or at least the way it is to some people in many other genres, usually the heroes. Even the most heroic heroes in Cyberpunk usually accept the fact that life is disposable, that people around them are very often disposable. And sometimes that gets expressed in a simply cynical attitude towards people dying or suffering for a variety of reasons. Other times it gets expressed in outright violence. There are some concepts that have been more or less born from the cyberpunk genre, although they have been taken up in other genres later, especially post apocalyptic. And most of those deal with ultra violence, or at least violence on another level than usual. One of the perhaps most symbolic ones being ammunition vending machines. The idea that using weapons is so common that you can get ammunition in a vending machine down the corner, the same way you would a bottle of water. The availability of weapons that can slaughter dozens, if not hundreds, is, I'm trying to figure out if I should say unparalleled today or if I should just say inspired by some of the most extreme cases today, because we do see a growing culture of desensitized violence. And that may just be a warning of things to come if cyberpunk becomes more real than it already is. Because isolation and desensitization often go hand in hand. The idea that nobody is really worth anything other than their monetary value or the monetary gain you can get from them is very desensitizing. Well, that's a funny word. Um, and yeah, as I said, everything and everyone is expendable. And depending on the story, that may go beyond just the the immediate people and things. Something like history and truth and even the future can be considered expendable. I don't remember which kind of media it was, but I'm pretty sure that's one cyberpunk inspired media had the um, the motto "the future is expendable" actually written into it as a big deal. And to someone from our very big quotes enlightened and very very big quotes era, um, that can seem horrifying. The idea that artifacts 1,000 years old can be torn apart in the blink of an eye because some corporation has a beef with some other corporation and that ends up in violence, and that somehow comes across where those artifacts are stored. That the rampant and careless destruction of things that are literally irreplaceable, but here become expendable nonetheless, is a deeper cut into the cyberpunk mentality. The An expression of the fact that nothing has any intrinsic value other than its monetary value. If something is 2,000 years old but doesn't earn anyone any money, then no one cares if it's destroyed. And in some cyberpunk stories, it goes so far that the past is basically unknowable because everything has been destroyed either in one big calamity or simply because of the very entropic nature of cyberpunk, the very destructive, erosive nature of cyberpunk. Things do not last long, and if they are not meant to last and they are not meant to make anyone any money, nobody cares. So that kind of cold, cynical, monetary focus means that a great part of the cyberpunk spirit, so to speak, is that nobody cares if you live or die. And yet, cyberpunk is not an outright dystopia. As I've reiterated several times, genre is very much about the options available to the main characters, or to anyone really. And cyberpunk is a bit of a conundrum in that regard, a bit of, what's the word? When two things are a dichotomy, a dichotomy, because there are two facts that somehow have to coexist in a cyberpunk world. One is the fact that almost anyone has access to tools that seem almost magical. There it was, the yawn. I was waiting for it. To tools that are almost magical. Anyone has access to, well, nearly anyone. There are always social classes that are just destitute. But those who are usually the main characters have access in one way or another to an arsenal of tools and methods to get things done. So it would seem that options are plenty, but in reality, there's a kind of touch of the cosmic genre in it that the real changes will only come from so high above the average person that none of those options really mean anything beyond the most immediate problems. You may have the ability to look through walls or to hack cameras in cities across the world. You may have access to any kind of information, any kind of weapon, any kind of tool, but none of that really changes anything on any big scale because you are always going to be the smaller fish. Technology may be amazing, but everybody is. I'm trying to not say worthless, but that is very much the sense that you get from Diving deep into the genre, no matter how good you are just a cog in the machine, and if you cause the slightest bit of trouble, you can be replaced, you can be destroyed, you can be blocked. There is very little you can do to change anything on a big scale. So all you can really do is be the best damn cog in the system that you are able to. And that gives a sense of isolation. The fact that what you really want to do does not matter. You are a cog in the machine. And that makes it very hard to pull off a story that has any kind of positive theme in Cyberpunk. But it is still possible. A lot of Cyberpunk is about the small victories, sometimes with great sacrifices. Undoing a smaller slight towards someone, defeating a smaller evil, getting someone put in their place even though you cannot get to them fully, stopping some bad thing from harming a few good people. Cyberpunk very much is about expending a whole lot of effort to do a very, very small amount of good. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it's just splatter, and it's just about going nuts and using all those fancy tools and weapons to smash as much as you can. There is an inherent sense of anarchy in cyberpunk, and that is sometimes the oof, I hate saying this, but that is sometimes the brighter side of it. Um, that if you just cross the line completely, at least you can completely destroy a lot of stuff around you before your time is up. So there is the cyberpunk, the punk part is very much this almost anarchy mentality that is sometimes the only way to bleed out a small victory in a very big, very dark, very scary world.